Okay, welcome at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland, but campus in Słubice. This is a great honor and privilege for me to opening this session on behalf of Research Committee 26, International Political Science Association. So we are now in Magic Place in Słubice. This is campus of Adam Mickiewicz University, exactly on the border between Poland and Germany, 100 kilometers from Berlin and 150 kilometers from Poznań, 300 kilometers from Warsaw. RC26 has already organized here 2 events, but Adam Mickiewicz University hosted the IPSA World Congress in 2016, not here in Słubice, but in Poznań. My only regret is that we are not meeting here in person, only virtually, but I believe that it will be possible soon in the future. Okay. So many thanks at the beginning to the members of RC26 board for their help, support, participation in this event. Thank you to all participants from many countries and many scientific centers. Special thanks to my colleagues from US who are attending today's the conference despite today's Thanksgiving Day. Happy Thanksgiving Day. Once again, thank you very much. I know that this is very early hour in US as well as in Brazil. Thank you, Cassius, for joining this session. This is also a pleasure and honor for me. Okay, at the beginning, maybe a few sentences. Okay, maybe I'm sorry. I would like to also thank scientific members of scientific board and Professor Oscar Pérez de la Fuente from Carlos III University in Madrid. Oscar, thank you very much also for providing the platform for today's events. Thank you also to members of organizational committee. So we'll have 4 panels. First, the position of human rights in global and regional political systems. Second, the next generation of human rights, attempts at diagnosis and prediction. Third, the role of human rights in national political system, a cross-continental perspective. And the last one, but not least, the role of human rights in national political system. This is okay. The human rights in concept of deglobalization and reglobalization. So I hope that during this conference, we will attempt to diagnose the position and role of human rights in contemporary political system. The evolution of the position and the role of human rights in political system is a complex topic involving changes in the legal framework, changes in social values, and the impact of international relations. The role of human rights in political system is currently characterized by both advances and setback. Despite significant progress in the recognition and protection of human rights around the world, many challenges remain, including the authoritarianism, armed conflict, social inequality, and freedom of expression. The evolving nature of these rights requires constant adaptation of legal and policy frameworks to meet new challenges. So once again, thank you very much for joining these sessions. We can start the first panel. I would like to ask Professor Oscar Pérez de la Fuente from Carlos III University of Madrid for chairing this session. And as a discussant, I would like to invite Professor Cassius Gomares-Chey from Brazil and our excellent speakers from US and from Hungary. We have 3 speakers, Michael Kilburn, Semahagn Abebe, and Peter Smuk. Okay, Oscar. So please chairing this session, and if you I hope that without any technical problems, we will go through this panel. But if everybody will any technical problems, please give me information. I hope that some persons from technical and IT department will help us. But Oscar, please chair this panel. Okay.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. This is the welcoming. This has been the welcoming speech of the chair of RC26, Jedrzej Spirita. Well, my pronunciation of Polish is not improving.
Don't worry, everything's okay.
In the organization of this panel, we have decided for the organization that every speaker, we have more or less 15 minutes, and we are going to have a general debate at the end. Okay? Then our first speaker today will be Kilburn, Endicott College, Berkeley, from the United States. And the paper is titled Anarchy, State and Utopia, the De-Evolution and the Position and the Role of Human Rights in Political Systems. Kilburn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
excellent.
Perfect. And thank you to the organizers for this unfortunately very necessary panel on the reconsideration of the role of human rights in the world. Of course, in the United States, we're anticipating another Trump administration, and worldwide, as was mentioned, authoritarianism seems to be on the march. So although my paper is mainly theoretical, I look forward to finding a new way forward and maybe rejuvenating the role of human rights in the position and role of states. So the title of my paper, Anarchy, State and Utopia, obviously signals Robert Nozick's famous work, but unlike Nozick, I'm not really arguing for the minimal state or a libertarian argument, except in the sense that I would like to see states do less. So I'll begin the paper. A specter is haunting liberalism, the specter of human rights, and a specter is haunting human rights, the specter of anarchy. Now, both specters haunt their respective meta-narratives by taking seriously their self-evident truth claims without the consolation of ideology, which Václav Havel has described as the bridge of excuses between the system and the individual, between the aims of the system and the aims of life, a world of appearances trying to pass for reality. And unfortunately, I think that's where we find ourselves, where the role of human rights has been playing more or less an ideological role to excuse the excesses of the state. So the ideology of liberalism claims that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. But because of the threat of anarchy, of a war of all against all in the state of nature, governments are established, ordained and established by, allegedly by we the people, in order to preserve these rights. So when the government fails in their prime directive to guarantee the rights of the people, or worse, itself becomes destructive of these ends, then it's supposed to be the right, even the duty of the people, to alter or abolish the state. In other words, natural rights, individual and collective, precede the state. Or as President Jimmy Carter put it, America did not invent human rights invented America. Likewise, the United Nations is not the source of rights are the source of the United Nations. And yet, in a classic bait and switch, once this consent to the state has been given, then states have assumed to themselves the prerogative over all men who must submit to its authority. So national security trumps human security, and civil, constitutional, and human rights are sacrificed to the prerogatives, ambitions, and whims of political power. So the modern state has mostly not only failed to address violations of human rights and continues to fail to do so, but is often complicit or directly culpable in them, that state security becomes an excuse to violate human rights. By far, the greatest degree of violence in human history has been perpetrated by states. In fact, according to Max Weber, the monopoly on violence is the defining characteristic of the state. So human rights is like a telltale heart of liberalism, a specter reminding us of this grift at the heart of the claims of state legitimacy and sovereignty. And human rights must be symbolically or ritually acknowledged, while too often ignored in practice. So if taken seriously, the premise of these pre-political inherent rights, equality and dignity, central to the liberal project that is culminated in the UDHR, this is a fundamentally anarchist position. As the American Edward Abbey put it, anarchism is democracy taken seriously. And Thoreau, another American anarchist, agreed, saying that in civil disobedience, he said, "I accept the motto that the government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted upon more systematically until it amounts to this, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that is the kind of government they will have." So the creation of the Westphalian state in 1648 guaranteed order and established the terms of modern state sovereignty: self-determination of states, legal equality, mutual non-intervention, and inviolable borders. Westphalian sovereignty introduced order, stability, and predictability in international relations, at least in the European interpretation, and established an interstate system of essentially gated communities that acted with impunity within their borders and a sort of conspiracy of silence outside the borders. And the consequences of this narrow notion of sovereignty has sometimes had terrible consequences for the citizens of the states, who had no choice and no recourse but to suffer the indignities and violence of poor or cruel leadership. Now, this conception of state sovereignty as exclusive and total jurisdiction within territorial boundaries prevailed in the West and by extension in the colonies for centuries, and abetting a host of crimes until the unparalleled atrocities of World War II forced a reconsideration, at least theoretically. According to the principles of Westphalia, Hitler had done nothing illegal until he crossed the Polish border in 1939. But the violations of human dignity under the Nazi reign were so egregious, so shocked the conscience of mankind, that the Allies, the victorious Allies, were forced to reconsider state sovereignty and invented the concept of crimes against humanity at Nuremberg. And so for the first time since Westphalia, a regime could be held accountable for the crimes and indignities perpetrated against its own citizens. So the creation of the United Nation, because of this threat of anarchy, which, you know, according to political realism, the world exists in a state of anarchy because there's nothing above state sovereignty. But because of this threat, we the peoples, determined to save succeeding generations from war, which has brought untold sorrow to mankind, established and ordained the United Nations. But the United Nations is a bit of a misnomer because it's not composed of nations or peoples, but it's a collection of sovereign states, governments that allegedly represent these people. So the United Nations should really be called the United States, or perhaps more accurately, the Confederate States, as sovereignty is still held at the nation state level rather than the international level. And like the Confederate States of America, widespread violations of human rights were widely and systematically condoned, if not sponsored, in the national interest. And the international body is relatively powerless to mitigate this. Membership in the United Nations and adherence to the laws and standards set by that body are essentially voluntary, and the rights and privileges of membership are often exercised absent the duties. While there are few effective deterrents to bad behavior, this creates a moral hazard towards national self-interest rather than the common good. These concessions to state sovereignty are inscribed throughout the legal and administrative infrastructure of the United Nations, from the Security Council to the Human Rights Council, and often compromise its effectiveness, as we unfortunately see these days, to carry out the founding mission to prevent war, guarantee human rights, promote international cooperation, establish international justice, show respect for treaty obligations, and also promote social progress and freedom. Now, as was mentioned at the beginning, we've seen huge normative and legal progress in this, but unfortunately less progress on the ground. By virtue of being on the winning side in World War II and writing the rules, 5 states hold veto power over global consensus through their membership in the P5 at the Security Council. States hold rotating leadership roles in key committees, including the Human Rights Council, regardless of their standing or practices. Now, Russia was suspended from the Human Rights Council in 2022 for the conduct of the war in Ukraine, but then assumed its rotating presidency of the Security Council as normal. So Article 2.7 of the UN Charter is quite clear about the limits of global governance. It says, nothing contained in the present Charter shall authorize the United States to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, or shall require the members to submit such matters to settlement under the present Charter. So absent an effective global Leviathan, which I'm not arguing for, but absent any mechanism to ensure order and compliance with these rules, the world exists, in the language of political realism, in a state of anarchy. There are now global norms and standards, but no effective governance. So I want to be mindful of time. So if international politics essentially operates in a condition of anarchy, then I thought, what can anarchism teach us about this dysfunctional relationship between a world order based on both state sovereignty on the one hand and allegedly universal norms on the other? Anarchism, with its critical focus on the debilitating aspects of the state for the realization of rights and freedom and dignity, anarchism is well positioned as a theoretical paradigm for unpacking these contradictions. Now, to be clear, like Marxism, anarchism is more useful as an analytical tool than a solution, except perhaps at the very local level. And we can discuss possibilities for that in Q&A. And this was the sort of the state of affairs until the end of the Cold War, when the collapse of the Soviet Union and the humanitarian disasters in Yugoslavia, Somalia, and particularly, I think, Rwanda, that a consensus began to build for a reconsideration of the limits of sovereignty within the UN system. In the 2000 Millennium Report, Secretary General Kofi Annan stated that, well, there's much to be grateful for, but there are many things to deplore and correct, he said. In the section on freedom from fear, he drew particular attention to the repeated failures to prevent genocide and mass atrocity violence, and highlighted the conflict between the contradictory dual missions of protecting humanity and protecting state sovereignty. I'll quote him quickly. He said, "If humanitarian intervention is indeed an unacceptable assault on sovereignty, how do we respond to Rwanda, to Srebrenica, these days to Gaza, to Ukraine, to gross and systematic violations of human rights that offend every concept of common humanity?" He said, "We confront a real dilemma. Few would disagree that the defense of humanity and the defense of sovereignty are principles that must be supported, but it does not tell us which principle should prevail when they are in conflict." So in response to this plea, Canadian Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy organized and hosted the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, with the unfortunate acronym ISIS, ironically foreshadowing its collapse in 2000. So the key theoretical breakthrough at this conference drew on the Sudanese lawyer and diplomat Francis Dung's intuitive, although sadly seemingly counterintuitive, move to turn the sovereignty of the Hobbesian security state on its head, or rather on its feet, and reimagine sovereignty as responsibility rather than autonomy, much less impunity. Accordingly, states have an obligation not only to respect other states' sovereignties, but to respect their own popular sovereignty as well, the rights of their own people. Now, this theoretical move gets around the principle of non-interference by suggesting that incompetent or oppressive regimes have already reneged on the basis of their sovereignty. And so ISIS finessed the obstacles to humanitarian intervention by re-engaging the missing term of the Hobbesian social contract, that obedience to the sovereign is predicated on the reciprocal expectation of the services and protections that a sovereign must provide the people. If the sovereign's unwilling or unable to protect the population from atrocity, then the social contract, state sovereignty, is null and void, and that allows or invokes the responsibility of the global community to step in, either to assist the state in question or to override it. So while the final report changed the normative discourse around state sovereignty, it left the legal framework unchanged, much less state practice. So the limits of this norm entrepreneurship were driven home by the events of September 11th, which ironically came right after the closing ceremonies of the ISIS conference. And that shifted the ground against humanitarian intervention towards inhumanitarian preemption. The responsibility of collective action had been invoked earlier in the Charter of the African Union. After R2P was institutionalized as a human rights norm, first in the ISIS document of 2001, adapted in principle by the World Summit Outcome document in 2005. It was affirmed by the Security Council in 2006. And so for the first time since Westphalia, the absolute sovereign right to non-intervention was limited by international law. The doctrine was first invoked in 2011, authorizing the use of force against Gaddafi's regime in Libya, although they were careful to, Obama in particular was careful to circumscribe that and say, we're not doing this again, we're not doing it in Syria. And after Libya fell into anarchy and civil war, it sort of delegitimized the principle of R2P, and it was, quietly put in a drawer somewhere in the United Nations and not really spoken of again. So from an anarchist perspective, this is not a conundrum. The failure of R2P is not just a problem of the language of the committee or a lack of political will or finding the right acronym, but it's a systematic failure, that there's a contradiction at the heart of the principle. As long as the current state-based system rewards, in fact requires, inaction, the only rational action on the part of its member states when faced with atrocity crimes is like Kitty Genovese. You look out the window, assume that someone else is calling the police, and the atrocities continue. So again, from this anarchist theoretical perspective, the failures of the United Nations human rights system are not perplexing and cannot be fixed within the current framework. And they're only tragic in the original Greek sense that they are inevitable. It's only a failure if you take seriously the mission, the mission of the United Nations to promote and encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. But if the real purpose of the United Nations system is designed to preserve, uphold, and defend state sovereignty, stripped of its ideology, the system is actually working as designed. There's a fundamental contradiction between state interest and human interest, between national security and human security, between state sovereignty and human sovereignty, that no amount of theorizing can solve. So if human rights is to be taken seriously, the evolution of the position and the role of human rights in political systems must entail a reconsideration of the systems itself, and particularly state sovereignty. As we say in the academy, hopefully I've problematized the issue, not solved it, and now we can move on, hopefully, to solutions if we can at least frame the problem correctly. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting intervention. And now is the turn of Peter Smuk from Széchenyi István University. Sorry for my pronunciation. The paper is titled Integrity of Democratic Process, New Narrative of Sovereign Protection in question. Okay, well, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dzień dobry. Thank you very much for having me here online in this distinguished conference and among distinguished colleagues. I try to share my presentation. If can you see my presentation now?
Yes.
Yes.
And also the changing. Oh, great. So this is the first time I'm using this this platform. Okay, I am to speak about the new tools for protecting democratic processes in certain countries, and the new narratives of sovereignty protection. As you can see in our next slides, this is about new legislations in certain countries. What was quite interesting in the recent years, that this foreign agent legislation became quite frequent in certain places of the world, and in certain countries legislations adopted pieces of acts, and also the European Union has policy actions on that field, that they feel that foreign interference is risking our democratic processes, and also risking the sovereignty of the state or even the European Union. As you know, the foreign interference has a history, and we all know that in the age of the Cold War, or in the 20th century, and also in recent elections in the United States or European Union, the media was full of these scandals, that there were foreign interference into these campaigns. It is also a part of the discussion that who are the influencers, who is interfering to the democratic processes, whose agents are doing something with our elections or democratic process, maybe Russia, US, China, or global capital. Someone say that authoritarian regimes, someone say that also democratic regimes are intending to interfere to democratic processes. This paper is a part of research, and also spoke about this issue in another research committee of IPSA. It was the research committee 20, which is dealing with the political finance and corruption, and I'm dealing with this issue as a constitutional lawyer, so maybe legal thinking or legal issues will be more frequent in this presentation that it is usual in a political science conference. So these are the main acts of legislations on that topic dealing with foreign agents. And these foreign agents are influencing the elections or the social decision-making processes, as the legislators say or justify these acts. And we are dealing in this research, we are analyzing these acts. You can see that here is an American act. I will tell you why is it here, but we have a Russian legislation in Hungary, Georgia, and recently also in Kyrgyzstan. And what is more, also France adopted an act on that field in this year. So we are analyzing these acts, which are the similarities and what is the message for that. And we also have some kind of reactions to this legislation from international courts or bodies like the Venice Commission. First, just showing you the challenge. What is the challenge concerning this topic? So the challenge is that there are foreign interferences to democratic processes. These are the literature or the academic thinking say that this is a hybrid threat to our democratic systems. For example, these are the three main dimensions: disinformation campaigns, fake news, and also cyber attacks against the infrastructure of the electoral process, and also the financial support for political actors influencing their acts or their decisions later on. You can see here I've used an American paper summarizing these practices or tools, how to influence the democratic processes by authoritarian regimes. These kind of foreign money practices are traced quite well, and this paper also has some kind of maps, just like a historical map on wars. These are the directions of these interfering actions. If we regard the regulation of foreign money, so the political finance and as a tool for interfering into domestic democratic processes, laws and maybe constitutions already dealt with the issue if they were concerning the states, political parties, and election campaigns. If you look at the bottom of these columns, you can see here that NGOs and also the political discourse in general, or social decisions, are in the middle of the new legislation. So this is something new in terms of regulating or protecting democratic process. So this was the main challenge for that. So the democratic processes and the systems face many challenges, but recently, given the latest structure changes of political discourse and platforms, disinformation and foreign influence have come to the fore. Fake news can distort citizens' views and threaten their ability to make informed decisions. This is all the more threatening when disinformation campaigns are conducted or funded by foreign actors. The negative political impacts of foreign and usually covert political finance are multiplied. The covert finance aims to induce politicians to adopt policies that favor the foreign donor instead of political interest. The European Union and also national governments are in search of effective tools to address the challenges to democracy. However, democratic systems find themselves in a tricky position of risking interference with the fundamental rights and freedoms that support democratic processes. the right of association that underpins the functioning of political parties and social organizations, the freedom of the media and the expression that animates the political discourse, the data protection rules that protect the privacy of NGOs and individuals, and the transparency rules that build trust in democratic institutions, or are caught up in this struggle. The European Union expressed its concern and called more effective actions in 2019. It's a resolution of the European Parliament, and it has also many other legal acts already since then. We can see that the sovereignty, referring to sovereignty as a justification for these limitations and actions, can become a Kampfbegriff, or a fighting concept, to use as a political concept and use as a tool for limiting, restricting political freedoms and fundamental rights. So this was the theoretical background and the foundation of this problem, the challenge, and we can now look at some kind of answers for that. This is just a draft on the developing of the Hungarian regulation. So we banned the foreign finance from states already at the system change, but in 2013, generally the foreign finance to political parties are banned. But later on, 2017, we have a Transparency Act on NGOs. So if an NGO accepts foreign money, foreign funding, it has to wear a label of that we are stating that we are an NGO accepting foreign money. It was stated, it was we have already an EU court decision that this is contrary to the European Union law. And last year, 1 year ago, the Hungarian Parliament amended the Hungarian fundamental law and also adopted a new act protecting protection of sovereignty. So this say that this is a general ban on foreign campaign funding. So not only parties, but every kind of candidate or organization is banned from accepting foreign campaign funding. And also there is a new office for investigating organizations that receive foreign funding, organizations, non-governmental organizations. We analyze the structure of foreign agent laws. This is the main aspect. We can compare them. It is interesting that even the Russian law says that we are just following the United States example, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which was adopted between the two world wars, but it has a bit different legal approach to this foreign agent definition. So it is a bit different, but it is very good for justifying the new actions. It is all about transparency. The next piece of justification. We only want to see the citizens or just raise the public awareness that some individuals or organizations are to influence the domestic politics and have some kind of influence or interference in this politics. Russian authorities said in front of the European Court of Human Rights in 2022, but it wasn't enough to protect their law. And all these acts has a rule to have a label. All these organizations who accept foreign money shall wear a label that we are foreign agent or something similar, as you can see here, these definitions for that. These all laws deploy vague terms, which is not acceptable in legal thinking or regarding the rule of law, such as political activity or social decision-making processes. These concepts or these definitions can be used by authorities quite in an arbitrary way. So the Venice Commission and also the European Court of Human Rights said that this is against the rule of law principle or requirements. And it is interesting that states, for example, Russia, accept or adopt a new regulation, but later on, year by year, it becomes more and more strict. So maybe the sanctions, maybe the authorities' competencies are changing, and it is becoming more and more strict. Just regarding the Hungarian law, it is it was adopted 1 year ago, and the new office for sovereignty protection works less than 1 year, but it has also already some kind of how to say discourse about its competencies and about those campaigns that is directed against, for example, the disseminating of war narratives in Hungary. This office has an investigation against the Transparency International organization in Hungary, and this NGO went to the court. The Constitutional Court has its decision. It was a few days ago, so it's a quite new decision. The Constitutional Court said that there is no problem with fair trial or the absence of legal remedy in this procedure, because as it said, the office has no administrative power, so it is just an opinion what the office can issue against these organizations. So we will see what will happen in the next stage, because the Transparency International will go to the Strasbourg court. So summarizing these patterns, there is two dangerous patterns in this legislation. The first is a presumption that if you are an NGO and if you receive financial support from abroad, it means that you are risking domestic democratic process and the sovereignty. It's a presumption. And also the Hungarian office started an investigation because of European Union support to an association. It's quite interesting. The European Union's support is some kind of interference to Hungarian sovereignty. And the other evil pattern is that the direction. So we can see that the European Union and also Western countries has similar legislative acts, but they are directed against the Russian or Eastern influence. But now we can see that here in the eastern part of Europe, we adopt and we use this kind of legislation against some kind of Western influence. So it was said that the Soros empire or the United States, CIA, European Union was all declared enemies in this discourse. Finally, just some concerns what can happen and what is about the future. So especially in the these all problems in the cyberspace. The internet is no longer an unregulated sphere. The European Union has proclaimed, following the legislative success of Digital Services Act or Artificial Intelligence Act. The DSA explicitly refers among the risks the actual and foreseeable negative effects on democratic processes, civic discourse, and electoral processes, as well as public security. This regulatory approach links a higher level of fundamental rights assessment to higher risk and invites economic and private actors in this field to co-regulate. These responses to control international interference in electoral processes, not only within Europe but also member states, can be observed together with the EU regulation on transparency and segmentation of political advertising. In the global scene, states with sufficient capacity and geopolitical positioning have implemented more drastic restrictions on their citizens' access to internet, while some smaller states have implemented them in a more restrained way. These drastic methods include multi-layered solutions ranging from complete detachment of the domestic internet network from the global network to extensive surveillance techniques and content filtering, as well as these applications made more efficient by the artificial intelligence systems. So while these states claim sovereignty over the influence of global tech companies and other states, we can also observe several layers or dimensions of a new colonization via the export of cyber technology. So these are not very good news on the development of political freedoms and fundamental rights. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
Thank you very much. Very interesting topics you have discussed, the public fundings, the political public fundings and other issues. And now our third speaker is Maha Abebe from Endicott College, Beverly. The title of the paper is Double Standards International Responses to Human Rights Violations, a case study of Ethiopia. Are you ready?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you. Do you have slides?
Yeah. Yeah, I shared. Do you see?
No, we can share. We can see. Could you? Now.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this conference, and really very interesting issues are being raised in this conference. My topic is on the double standards in international response to human rights violations, particularly the case study of Ethiopia. Basically, one of the most important challenges we are facing in the international human rights discourse is the double standard international community responds to various international human rights violations around the world. So I try to analyze how such double standard has been undermining human rights around the world. So my study is based on Amnesty International report in 2023. After the Ukraine conflict, Amnesty International highlighted that there is different treatment of conflicts in different parts of the world. For instance, there has been a swift response to the Ukraine invasion by Russia, and also the other related responses of Western countries to the Ukraine war in terms of human rights, economic sanctions, military assistance, as well as ICC investigations. When you compare the kind of responses international community has been providing to other human rights violations and conflicts such as Ethiopia and Myanmar, it's very significantly different, and there is clearly a very unique response to the Ukraine war, while there has never been really any significant attention being paid to the conflicts in some of these developing countries, and also the human rights violations being committed in these countries. So basically, the international human rights system is based on the principle that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, and the international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing and with the same emphasis. This is the Vienna Declaration and Program of Actions in 1993. So basically, we assume that there needs to be a universal treatment of all human rights issues around the world, but that's not the case. What are the patterns of double standard we have been witnessing the last many years around the world? One is a lack of accountability of human rights violations by Western forces. When we see the response of international human rights organizations towards the human rights violations by Western powers, there has never been really any significant accountability, particularly Amnesty International and other human rights organizations have been highlighting how after the Iraq invasion, United States troops have been committing torture and also detentions, illegal detentions, as well as war crimes being committed. But there has never been any international accountability to such violation of human rights by the United States. So there has never been any significant accountability of human rights violations committed by Western forces. The other is, as mentioned, is discrepancy in treatment of human rights violations, and particularly if the conflict or the human rights violation is occurred in the north, such as in Ukraine. There has been significant tension as well as more accountability to human rights violations committed in these countries. But if that human rights violation is committed or the conflict is in the global south, there is minimal focus and accountability to the human rights violations committed in these regions. So there is a significant discrepancy. Even within the developing nations, in some cases, we observe significant differences. For instance, as you see the Palestinian-Israel conflict, there has been international focus and attention, while, for instance, other global conflicts in the Africa or the other parts of the world, they do not have any significant attention from the international community. So there are different patterns of human rights violations around the world. So basically, to provide you some background about the war in Ethiopia and the human rights violations being committed in the country for the last many years, particularly during the Tigray war. This is a report from the Foreign Affairs. According to this report, over 500,000 soldiers and 360,000 civilians have been killed since the war, and this was one of the most devastating conflicts we had in the world for the last many years. What is the response of the international community in this case? There has been a joint investigation by the United Nations and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is a very important response by the international community. And the report from these organizations provides that all sides have been committing war crimes in the region, in Tigray, and torture of civilians, gang rapes, and all other human rights violations were being committed during this conflict. Even now, the conflict is being expanded to other parts of the country now, particularly in the Amhara region of Ethiopia, in the northwestern part of the region. There is now civil war being between the Ethiopian government and the rebel groups are fighting, and really millions of people are under siege, and extrajudicial killings are being committed, and war crimes, particularly the Ethiopian government has been using drones to attack civilians, and every day there has been significant violations of human rights in the region. In addition to that, in the Oromia region, which is also another region in Ethiopia, there is a civil war being held between the Ethiopian government and the rebel groups, and civilians being kidnapped, killed, tortured, and war crimes are being committed by all the parties involved in this war. So there is, even if there has been continued conflict and human rights violations being committed in Ethiopia for the last 5 years, compared to the attention given to other international conflicts and human rights violations, the Ethiopian conflict didn't really attract international reaction and response, which really exacerbated the situation in the country. So in terms of like, let me first, I think even the one of the United Nations Under Secretary General and Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, she claims that there is heightened risk of genocide being committed in Ethiopia. So, because the political system is structured based on ethnic identity and ethnic difference, this has really brought about significant risk for commission of genocide in Ethiopia. So when you see, like, you know, after the Rwandan genocide, the international community promised that this will not happen again, but this has been happening again and again, and despite the fact that there is really threat of genocide being committed in Ethiopia, even I think in some cases genocide is being committed in Ethiopia, there has never been any significant international attention on such human rights violations. So let's compare what kind of responses the international community provided with respect to the conflict in Ethiopia and the human rights violations. In terms of the United States, during the start of the Tigray conflict, the United States Secretary of State announced that there will be visa denials for key players of the conflict to enter into the United States, but there are only few of them, military officials and rebel leaders, denied visa. Then President Biden signed an executive order for some level of sanctions on Ethiopian leaders or some leaders of the military and also Eritrean government officials, but also this was also very limited, and this has never been even exercised and implemented. The other is the Treasury Department block property and prevent U.S. financial institutions from serving sanctioned individuals. This also implemented, but it is very, very minimal. Probably one of the most important action was termination of Ethiopian AGWA, which is African Growth Opportunity Act Trade Preference Agreement. This of course a significant sanction, because Ethiopia has been exporting its products to the United States duty-free for a long time. This is probably the only significant response from the United States. And also, in terms of making reports, the United States determined that all sides in the brutal conflict in Ethiopia and Tigray region committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. So that's also important because the United States government has determined that war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed by all the actors in the war. So this also could help to bring some level of accountability. In terms of the European Union response, also is very minimal. The European Union spends just 88 million euro budget response to the Ethiopian government until humanitarian just get access to northern Tigray. It was temporary and it's not really also significant. But I think the European Union is focusing to bring about like transitional justice mechanisms in Ethiopia. So the European Union is supporting such kind of like dubious transitional justice mechanisms to bring about accountability of human rights violations in Ethiopia. But I don't think this will bring about any significant accountability because the Ethiopian government controlled all the transitional systems like human rights institutions, as well as the court system. The justice system has been controlled by the Ethiopian government, and I don't think the European Union really believes that there will be significant accountability by such transitional justice mechanism. Then the European Union also provides humanitarian assistance for Ethiopia, and also after the Tigray rebel groups and the Ethiopian government signed a peace agreement, the European Union again released its aid to Ethiopia. So it's just business as usual. So from the United Nations perspective, the United Nations Security Council has been meeting on the Tigray war for many months, but there has never been any significant statement or action being taken by the Security Council. The only positive development was the Commission on the Human Rights Experts was created to investigate human rights violations in Tigray. This was the only response from the United Nations. Now, particularly the last few years, Western governments are easing the economic sanctions as the Ethiopian government, and all the United Nations, United States, and the European Union are advocating for transitional justice mechanisms rather than international accountability of the human rights violations being committed in Ethiopia, which is like referral to the international tribunals such as the ICC didn't happen. So when we see the comparative analysis, how the international community responds to the violations in Ukraine and in Ethiopia, for instance, in terms of human rights violations, in the case of Ukraine, the European Union and the United States have been actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to address human rights violations in Ukraine, including supporting ICC investigations. In the context of Ethiopia, they are only exerting some kind of diplomatic actions from the European Union and the United States regarding the human rights violations in Ethiopia. And it's very limited, and most of the involvement was providing humanitarian access to Tigray rather than human rights violations. In terms of economic sanctions, there has been severe economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its key sectors. But in the case of Ethiopia, the economic sanctions on human rights violations are very minimal, and preference for targeted measures against specific individuals, which is not even implemented, rather than broader sanctions on the Ethiopian government because the Ethiopian government is one of the major recipients of aid from the European Union and the United States, and despite the fact that even the United Nations mandated experts came up with a report that there has been significant human rights violations in Ethiopia. Both the European Union and the United States didn't take a significant economic sanctions on the Ethiopian government, even to stop the aid they provide to the government. In terms of the diplomatic pressure, when you see the Ukraine case, both the European Union and the United States have been exerting considerable political pressure on Russia to adhere to the international humanitarian law and the cessation of hostilities. But in the case of Ethiopia, the pressure is very minimal and less really pronounced, and there has never been really any major diplomatic pressure on the Ethiopian government to stop the war or to bring the perpetrators to justice, and also to provide humanitarian access to people in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. So the diplomatic pressure was also very minimal. In terms of the multilateral engagement, the European Union and the United States have been coordinating the efforts to address the crisis in Ukraine. There has been really a very significant diplomatic partnership between the United States and European Union on this regard. But in terms of the reaction on Ethiopia, there has never been a very unified multilateral engagement. And when you see the response of the United States and the European Union, it's very different approaches. They didn't even coordinated their multilateral engagement with the Ethiopian government, and this has really provided the Ethiopian government to continue its violations of human rights. So basically, from the Ukraine conflict and the responses of the international community in terms of economic sanctions, diplomatic engagement, as well as human rights activity, there is significant discrepancy and differences. And that's why there is a double standards. Clearly, there is double standard of treatment of human rights violations being committed in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. This has brought about significant implications to the human rights discourse, the global human rights discourse. One is, I think, particularly in developing countries such as Ethiopia, it has undermined confidence in the international human rights system. So now many people in Ethiopia have already lost their confidence in the United Nations or the United States or any European Union systems could help them or address the problems. So because of that, this has brought about even worse human rights violations in the country, because all groups are fighting to defend their own constituency, because they believe that there is no any international system that would really bring the Ethiopian officials to justice, particularly the ICC or any other international accountability. And also because of lack of any accountability, it's encouraging impunity. Particularly the Ethiopian officials, government officials, are now acting in impunity, and they realized that there will never be any international pressure or action to bring this government official to justice, even if the United Nations investigation as well as United States human rights investigations brought about the fact that there has been war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed. There has never been any indictment or any kind of accountability under the ICC. So I think generally there needs to be more consistent and principled approach to address human rights violations globally. Otherwise, I think in the future, the international human rights system would lose its relevance and significance. In addition to the issues now the international human rights system has faced, as it has been presented by other presenters earlier, the international human rights system is also facing this challenge because there has never been any consistent approach in terms of addressing human rights violations around the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. For this speech denouncing the double standard of human rights in the international community. And now is the turn of the discussant. Our discussant today will be Cassius Guimaraes from the University Federal of Maranhão, between other affiliations, and it's also member of the IPSA RC26 board. Cassius?
Yes, dear Oscar, good morning, buenos dias. I'd like first of all to congratulate all three speakers. Very needed issues that the three of them share with us. The three papers, the first one by Professor Michael Kilburn, and the second by Professor Peter Smuk, and then for Semahagn, Abebe, collectively explore significant themes related to human rights, governance, and the integrity of democratic process. So I'd like to underline three core perspectives that I perceive the three papers presented are very interconnected. First of all, in different ways, the three research approach the sovereignty and accountability principles. All three papers engage with the tension between state sovereignty and the need for accountability in governance. Kilburn, for instance, discusses how state sovereignty can impede human rights protections. On the other hand, Smuk analyzes how foreign money and external influences can affect the integrity of democratic process. And finally, Abebe critiques the inconsistent international responses to human rights violations based on geopolitical interests. Each of them underscores the importance of upholding the states accountable for both their citizens and international norms, suggesting that true sovereignty should involve responsibilities towards upholding human rights. I would say, if they allow me, that what is very common between all the three critiques is the deepened lack of coherence, either by the United Nations bodies, either from different governments, and of course, all of these imbalancing perspectives put in very dangerous risk the understanding of the perspective of democracy and the human rights protections in the end of the day. Secondly, the role of international norms and standards. The papers highlight very significantly the international human rights norms and standards in guiding state behavior and shaping responses to violations. Kilburn emphasizes the challenges in enforcing these norms in sovereign states. For his turn, Smuk calls for new narratives that respect democratic integrity alongside international standards. And then Abebe critiques the selective application of human rights principles by the international community, mainly by United States government and the European Union. Maybe that Abebe's critiques could face a political justification under the economic geopolitics strengthening. And together, they suggest that a robust adherence to international norms is crucial for fostering accountability, protecting human rights, and promoting democratic integrity. And finally, impact of external influences on democratic process. All three papers presented very necessarily addresses how external influences, whether from foreign funding, geopolitical interests, or international scrutiny, affect the functioning of democratic systems and the protection of rights. Kilburn, many thanks for discussing the implications of external interference on human rights. Professor Smuk, many thanks to examine how foreign money can compromise democratic integrity. And finally, Professor Abebe, for analyzing the role of international actors in shaping responses to human rights violations. Now, I would like just to leave for all of you maybe a humble question. So somehow I can try to give you opportunity that you can further your explanations and your researches. How can the international community develop a coherent and effective strategy that balances respect for state sovereignty with the need to address human rights violations and uphold democratic integrity? In particular, how can this strategy ensure that the principles of equality and the meaningful democratic participation are central to both national and international efforts, especially when geopolitical interests often compromise these values? Many thanks to all of you. Many thanks, Professor Oscar and Professor JJ.
Okay, well, now it's turn for the answer. Our speakers, please, in the same order of intervention. Michael Kilburn, we don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
We listen you now.
Yeah, so to me that's the key question that ties these papers together is how to balance human rights and state sovereignty, how to balance, how to make the international system work. I don't have a good answer to it. There's been a number of reforms of the UN system proposed. I don't have a good answer to it because I think there's a fundamental contradiction there. Theoretically, at least, going back to the roots of the liberal project, which is to constantly remind ourselves that state sovereignty should be a means and not an end in itself to protecting rights. Institutionally, what that looks like, I'm not sure, and you want to be careful of giving too much power to an international oversight of state sovereignty, because that could be abused just as easily. I would think maybe a better solution would be more from the grassroots, giving more autonomy and more power, maybe sovereignty from the ground up, from the people. One idea might be having something like a popular representation in the United Nations rather than filtering it through nation state representation. This could be something like a European Parliament for the whole world, so that individuals actually make the United Nations have the representation of nations or people rather than governments. I can't imagine that states would want to give up their sovereignty to allow any effective self-governance by the peoples, we the peoples of the world. I don't have a solution to that, but I do recognize and thank the discussant for pointing out the similarities between the papers. So I'll defer to my colleagues for solutions.
Okay, Peter Smuk.
Yes, thank you very much for the comments and remarks. I also, instead of suggestions, just my opinion, somehow I am optimistic and somehow I am pessimistic. About the pessimistic issue, I think sovereign states, especially if they are big or powerful enough, just really hard or impossible to regulate or influence meaningfully by international law and international courts or international human rights procedures. We just experienced that. On the other hand, I am optimistic if we are regarding or looking at those societies who are maybe balancing turning to authoritarianism or just turning to or resisting democratic procedures. It is a keyword could be that these societies should be, and I am optimistic they will be more resilient. So resilience can be a keyword, and with education and promotion of human rights can prevail. Just connecting it to my topic, you can experience the impact of the social media on the society and democracy and democratic procedures. So we experienced that 20 years ago there was no Facebook, and we made campaigns and we made face-to-face communication, and everything has changed on that field. But society and the young people and also the elderly are learning how to use social media, how to realize what is fake content. And I'm really optimistic that this capacity or literacy for using social media will be better in time, and that will cause that societies will be more resilient against this kind of authoritarian tendencies, and that could help in many countries. This is just a hope, maybe a dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments and feedback. Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I think since state sovereignty continues to be the foundation of international relations, I think particularly these major Western powers will continue to pursue their own geopolitical interests rather than promoting human rights. So I think probably one of the way this could be addressed is when there is really more liberal or more human rights movements in those countries, which could make or pressure these governments to really pursue human rights as really major foreign policy objective, rather than other economic or political interests to be pursued by those governments. Unfortunately, this will not be happening the next few years, because we are now witnessing more populist governments coming to power. Even they will have less and less focus on human rights. Even they disregard, for instance, President Trump completely disregards the United States to intervene in human rights violations around the world. So unfortunately, such populist and realist governments are now coming to power in many Western countries, and I really, the next few years, it could be even more challenging for the human rights system. Thank you.
Okay, well, now I think we have some time. We have an open turn. Yes, Jedrzej wants to speak. It's your turn.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all speakers, for excellent presentation. but if I may ask a few questions to all speakers, I know that I can see that Professor Smuk is going to switch off. Okay, maybe if I may start from you, because I know that you have limited time, but you know, the case of Hungary, it's very important for Polish experiences, because leader of the ruling party last 8, Jarosław Kaczyński, promised that we will have the Budapest scenario in Poland. Fortunately, it happened only partially. So now we have a democratic majority in Polish parliament. But thank you very much for this comparison of many regulations in the world. Started from the US regulation from 1938, but okay, it was in the first part of first 20th century. Russia introduced the new standards of such regulation of foreign agents regulation. So you mentioned about this regulation in Hungary. So my question is, do you think, what is your opinion that Hungary now is, so the standard of democracy and democratic values and standards of protection of human rights is now rather, because Hungary is a member of European Union, yes, still, is rather more close to the Russian standards or to European standards? What do you think about so the contemporary situation in Hungary?
Thank you very much. Polák with dwa bratanki. I enjoy your empathy and friendship in that field as well. I think that if I want to be, how to say, if I want to give you an expert answer, that will be that measuring of democracy is a quite difficult thing. So measuring where is Hungary now in terms of democratic functioning, closer to Russia or closer to the European standards, I have to say that this is it's a multiple dimension issue, and I think we are still inside the European Union. The European Union, with its financial resources and institutional framework, was able to keep Hungary's political elites' attitudes towards anything in bay. So I think European Union was able to limit those aspirations to become quite different, so-called illiberal democracy. But however, everything that could be done in that framework was done by the government in the last 14 years. But I think Russia is still far away from here. Actually, we will see if in the next elections, that will be in 2026, if in the campaign Novichok or other poisons or other tools will appear, we can say that we are closer to Russia. But until the Hungarian elections and campaigns are peaceful, I mean physically there are no beatings or killings or anything, are peaceful, until then it is rather European democracy. And I think some standards and the institutional framework for human rights protection inside Hungary is still robust, with really serious deficiencies, but the human rights protection mechanisms are still livid. I trust in my colleagues, in my lawyer colleagues in the constitutional court and the regular ordinary courts, and at the Ombudsman's office. Although I could list you a lot of deficiencies and problems with those in the fundamental rights issues. This is some kind of answer. And really, excuse me for leaving this discussion. I'm going to come back in the afternoon, but now is a PhD defense, and I preside this committee now, so I have to leave. Thank you very much for your questions and comments. Goodbye. Do widzenia.
Thank you. Bye. Do widzenia. If I may ask Michael, because President-elect Donald Trump, during the last election campaign, promised that he will solve the Ukrainian conflict during the 24 hours. So, but he didn't explain how it will be possible, and especially so it will be possible with or without Ukrainian people or Ukrainian people. And second interesting case, this is he also promised that very fast he will solve the problem of illegal migrants in US. Do you believe that it will be possible without the violation of human rights? I mean about first and second case, and so the Trumpism or Trump doctrine. It will be the official doctrine for next period, next 4 years in the world, because you know it's we in Poland. So American election is very important, and so because U.S. president is sometimes more popular than Polish president in Poland. Okay, but I think the position of U.S. in the international relations is so. Of course, obvious. It is obvious that this is very, very strong. So. Do you believe that we will have the dark years next years during this period, or I'm maybe pessimistic person?
Well, first of all, you're welcome, world.
So, resume. So we can say that this is the idea for solving these two problems. This is anarchy or utopia. Yeah, based on your title.
I would probably say neither. That it would be the state will prevail, and in this case, the state personified by Trump. So, you're welcome, world, for Donald Trump 2.0. I'm afraid I'm even more pessimistic this time because people knew what they were voting for, and I think you're quite right that the American president sort of personifies, or is not only it's not only personality, but it's the power. So I've actually argued before that maybe Polish people and other people should have a vote in the American elections, because you'll have to suffer the next administration almost as much as we will. Yeah, I'm afraid I have very little hope. I think the human rights situation will become even more worse. I don't know how that's possible in certain circumstances. As I think it was Guterres had said, the United Nations is running out of words to describe how dire the situation is. In terms of solving the problems, I mean, if you look at Donald Trump's history, is in business as well as politics, his attitude is to claim credit no matter what happens. So yeah, it's possible that the wars could end. I don't know if he can provoke it, but we have to look at what that means for the war to end, because peace is not just the absence of war, but you have to look at the consequences of that. So, for example, in Gaza, he's expressed full-throated support for Netanyahu, despite the charges from the ICC. And you could end the war in Gaza by completing the genocide and giving Netanyahu's administration everything it wants, including seafront property for Jared Kushner in northern Gaza. That would end the war, but would continue to violate the rights of Palestinians, certainly. Same thing in Ukraine. I think he could probably he would call it cutting a deal or making a deal, but some of his deals could be just, give Putin and Kim Jong-un everything they want and declare victory. so yeah, I'm afraid I'm quite pessimistic about the dark age we're about to enter in. The only possible silver lining might be that it would clarify the hypocrisies and the contradictions within the current system, because whether that means proving once and for all that the United Nations is completely powerless against state sovereignty, then maybe people will realize that we need to try something else. Otherwise, the United Nations will just continue to fulfill its ideological function of papering over the contradictions between human rights and state sovereignty. But yeah, I'm afraid it's a dark Thanksgiving today. So I don't have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I may also ask, we have maybe 2 minutes to Semahagn. Thank you very much for your presentation. I agree with you that, of course, unfortunately, we can observe many such silent conflict. When I mean silent, I mean that, for example, this conflict in Ethiopia is completely absent in main media. Yeah, of course, Ukraine conflicts and Gaza conflicts. It's you can find covers from this region in international media, but not from Ethiopia. But so thank you very much. I agree with you that we can find such double standards, but. So this is also a question about the role of United Nations in the contemporary world, because from my perspective, Poland is a neighbor of Ukraine. We can say that this is also rather symbolic or utopian sanctions, because, for example, last October, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, during the BRICS summit in Kazan, he met with President Putin. Yeah, so we have decision of International Criminal Court against Putin, and lately Michael mentioned about arrest warrant against Netanyahu. And what we can see, nothing. Yeah. So do you think that I can give you some more evidence that, for example, we have sanctions against Russia, but Poland, even last year, bought coals and gas and petrols from Russia. Yeah? So look at the Russian economy; it still works. Yeah. So. I can see that this is double standards, but unfortunately, this is a question about the position and role of United Nations to solve the international problem. Maybe we need some new order on this level. Yeah, what do you think about this?
I think. Yeah, the international community, as you said, taking some actions to really. Mike, could you mute. So the international community is trying to hold accountable, like Putin and Netanyahu. That's a good approach, but I think the problem is they are highly dependent on these major powers in the world. Like, for instance, in terms of Ethiopia, since, as you mentioned, the media didn't cover and Western countries didn't pay attention to the conflict in Ethiopia. So the same way the United Nations doesn't really give a significant approach or work on the case of Ethiopia. So basically, even if there are some ways the international community is doing, like Putin, for instance, in terms of economic sanction, Russia economies may be dependent on oil, and it may be difficult for the international community to completely paralyze Russia. But in the case of Ethiopia, which is a major aid recipient, even by engaging the Ethiopian government in terms of providing the aid they provide to the government, they could really significantly improve the human rights situation in Ethiopia. So the European Union, the United States, or even the United Nations didn't use their leverage, which is already available, to really bring about human rights accountability in Ethiopia. So I still, yes, there has been some improvements in terms of accountability around the world, but I think still there is significant double standard, and the international community is not using their leverage to pressure the Ethiopian government or other governments in the developing world to bring about justice and human rights to their people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the speakers, also the discussion. I think it has been a very interesting session, and we can stop here. Maybe Jedrzej wants to say something to close this panel.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all speakers, for brilliant papers, speech, and presentations. Thank you very much. So now we have a 15 minutes break. So I hope that we will start 1:30 Warsaw and Madrid time. Okay. But still on this same platform. Once again, thank you very much, Oscar, for sharing this platform. And so we'll see soon, yeah? And one more issue, because I will send the certificates to all speakers maybe next week. Okay, it's not a problem. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have. Thank you very much. We have the question from.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Cassius, thank you very much. Yeah.